and welcome to Frost Over the World. Later in the programme, mega actor with 2 Oscar nominations as Best Actor to his credit, John Hurt. Then General Wesley Clark on next week's crucial Democratic primary in Pennsylvania, the world food crisis and the elections in Paraguay. But first of all, the failure of Zimbabwe's Electoral Commission to publish the results of the presidential poll 3 weeks after the votes were cast continues to cause ructions, to put it mildly. And this week the focus of dissent has been not Robert Mugabe but Thabo Mbeki, the leader of neighbouring South Africa. Mr Mbeki's insistence last weekend that there is no crisis in Zimbabwe was refuted by members of his own ANC party in South Africa. The ANC's president, Jacob Zuma, said the region cannot afford a deepening crisis in Zimbabwe. Well, I'm joined now from Johannesburg by the Secretary-General of the ANC, Gwede Mantashe. We're delighted he's joining us. Gwede, welcome.
Good day, David.
Well, there's plenty to talk about, and there's news today of a shipment of arms in a Chinese boat off the harbour in Durban, which is carrying weapons, according to this list here, 3 million rounds of ammunition, 3,500 mortars. And that is going to be unloaded and then transported to support the Mugabe regime in Zimbabwe. Or it was going to be, but now the unions are saying they won't touch it. Neither the unions who deal with the docks nor the ones who deal with the trucks. What do you think about that?
Now, this reflects the importance of having a vibrant civil society organizations like trade unions, because they can actually work more and rely on activism. Because government will always try to develop diplomatic relations with other countries. Therefore, that distinction is quite important for us. In our view, Zimbabwe should be brought to normality as soon as possible.
Should be brought what?
To normality.
To normality as soon as possible. So that these weapons, which would strengthen the abnormality of the current regime, it would be better if those weapons stayed in South Africa on that ship.
In our view, we have said as the ANC, we should try to avoid bringing everything into the space of the election crisis, because if we do that, we may not be focused on the real issues. But the question of the weapons should be a separate matter, which may be an issue once the presidential candidate wins and there is a government.
And in fact, with your closeness with the unions yourself and your work with unions, you applaud these unionists who are refusing to move the weapons at the moment. Do you applaud them?
No, you know, when Satao refuses to touch the weapons, it is a solidarity action on the part of unions, because union members in Zimbabwe feel the brunt of the situation there. And therefore, when our unions play solidarity, they are playing their role in terms of international working class solidarity.
Now, what do you feel about the situation? South Africa has finally joined international calls for Zimbabwe's Electoral Commission to release the results of last month's presidential election, which is a step forward there by the South African government, because at the moment, Thabo Mbeki seems to have been a bit out of touch last weekend, saying that there was no crisis in Zimbabwe. There is a crisis in Zimbabwe. Everyone can see it, can't they?
No, there is a crisis in Zimbabwe. If you listened even last week, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, Aziz Pahad, issued a statement that was actually nudging the Zimbabwean government to release the results. Because if you don't release those results, you create a governance vacuum, in the sense that even the parliamentarians and members of the Senate cannot be sworn in. And therefore there is a vacuum of governance, and therefore giving President Mugabe leeway to govern by decree. And we don't think it is helpful in the situation.
And in terms of the situation, Mr Mbeki, who's supposedly the mediator, I noticed Mr Chirangi has said that he thinks, in fact, someone else should take over as the mediator, but he hasn't had, Mr. Mbeki hasn't had the best of good fortune as a mediator so far, has he?
No, Mr. Mbeki, you must actually take the full process into context, because if you look into the Zimbabwe, the fact that out of that mediation there's an agreement to plug the result out of the polling station every time they come out, that actually gave the MDC space to monitor the election closely, and therefore anybody who queries those elections will find it difficult to prove otherwise. And I think we should give credit to that process in that regard. But the delay of the release of the presidential results is an issue that has actually a little bit reflected quite badly on the position of the mediator. I don't think when we say, when he said there is no crisis in Zimbabwe, that should mean there is general no crisis. We know that there is a socio-economic crisis in Zimbabwe, despite the fact that the results have not been resolved for the presidential elections. There is a bigger crisis which we're feeling in South Africa in terms of the pressure of our economics and social infrastructure.
And in terms of Mr. Mbeki, are you disappointed with him so far on this?
No, I always try to be as objective as possible and see the positive side of everything. If Mbeki is a mediator on behalf of the SADC as a region, he must try to play as neutral a card as possible and issue as much nuanced a statement as he can. But the South African government, as represented by the Foreign Ministry and as parties here like ourselves as the ANC, we must be able to state the facts as we see them.
And what do you see about the near future, Gwede? I mean, can you see there being a happy outcome to the problems of Zimbabwe, or do you think it's going to go on getting worse?
If you can turn around the situation in Kenya that we have seen over the last few months, and today there is a government that has been sworn in, I think that the Zimbabwean situation can be turned around. But there must be a desire and will to get it right.
Well, we thank you very much for joining us, Gwede. It's a great pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you, David.
Well, in a minute, General Wesley Clark on next week's crucial Democratic primary in Pennsylvania. That's after this incredibly short break.